Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today we're back with another video, and we're just going to be jumping into the best photo settings for the new Sony A7C. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the settings. First up, we're going to need to turn our camera on, and to do that, we're just going to flip this switch here, and then we're going to go up here to menu. And when you first open the screen, you'll either be on this star page, which I wouldn't worry too much about, or this main page. And pretty much everything on this main page will help us change the settings that we need to. There are some other details that I'll cover in the actual settings page, but for most purposes and for most shooting scenarios, you're really only going to need to change stuff on this page. So we're just going to jump over to it, and the first thing we're going to see is shutter speed, aperture, our exposure composition, and our ISO. Now, these are things that change a lot depending on lighting situations and different scenarios and just a lot of different variables. And there is a really good way to learn how to balance all of these settings. I'm not going to cover it here because I already have a video on this subject, and you can find the link to that up there. So if you want to learn how to kind of balance them out depending on what shooting situations you are in, that is a great video for that. The next thing we'll find down is the format button. So this is how you would format your memory card. I don't currently want to do that right now. And then the next thing is going to be your file format. Now, automatically this camera is going to be set to JPEG, but if you want to get the best quality photos, we're going to switch that to RAW. And then as you can see to the right of that is also the RAW file type. So if you are shooting in RAW, this is the file type that you are going to get. Now, a compressed RAW file is going to be a smaller file size because all of the data is going to be compressed in that image. And then it just goes up from there. So there's small, medium, and large, or there's fully uncompressed. Now, I personally recommend shooting in uncompressed. This is going to render a really large file size, but in my opinion, you get the best quality image. And if you're going to print your photos ever to be really, really big, this is going to give you like the best looking images to do that. So, and then this will be your JPEG quality, but because we're not shooting JPEG, you don't really need to worry about that. And then the next thing is going to be your JPEG image size, which again, we're not shooting JPEG, but I like to just leave it at large. Your aspect ratio is going to be the size of the image that you get. The sensor on this camera is a 3:2 sensor, which means it's 3:2. So you're more than welcome to change this aspect ratio, but in reality, you're gonna have the option to do that in post, like in your editing software. So there's not a really big reason to do this now. So I usually just leave it as is at 3:2. And then if I need to crop it later on to say like 16:9, I do that then. But some people do prefer to shoot in 16:9 just because they can see maybe what the final photo will look like, but I prefer to just get the entire image. Next is your shoot mode. As you can see up here, I am currently in M mode, and basically that's where this would display here. Next is going to be your drive mode. So this is where you're going to be able to change your shooting speed. So if you want to do continuous shooting, if you want to do some timers, or if you want to switch to bracketing. Bracketing is great for HDR photography or high dynamic range situations. So if you have an extremely bright area and in the same composition you have a really dark area, bracketing will make that image really pop because you'll be able to capture really dark shadows as well as get a lot of detail from the really bright whites. So if I were to go ahead and set up bracketing, for me personally, I would do a 2 exposure value, which basically means every 2 stops it will take a photo. And then I personally like to do 5 images because that's just going to cover me on pretty much all of my bases. So whatever settings you have set, basically your 0 setting, it'll take a photo 2 stops before that, and then it'll take another photo 2 stops before that, and then it'll also take a photo 2 stops after that, and then another one 2 stops after that 0 mark. So what it's doing is it's just covering your darkest darks and your whitest whites. Flash mode, I don't use flash mode whatsoever. And then flash comp, again, I don't use flash. White balance, I generally always have mine set to auto white balance. There are very rare instances when I'll change it. For the most part, these cameras do a great job in auto white balance. Next up, we have our focus mode. There's gonna be a lot more options on this for video. Currently, I have it set to manual focus because the lens that I have attached here actually doesn't shoot in autofocus. So it's just kind of locked in there. But basically, there's autofocus single and autofocus continuous. For photography, I usually just shoot in autofocus, and that's usually the best way that I find to do it, unless I'm doing like astrophotography or something. So, and then the next is the focus area. Again, depending on what you're shooting, you might change this. Generally, I like to shoot wide. And then we're gonna jump over here to this kind of camera settings. And this is only possible to see if you have your dial set to the camera. And a lot of these settings we've already covered, like our file format, our RAW file type. So we've kind of gone over these already, but there are a few things that I want to show you. For example, drive mode. And drive mode is basically going to allow you to take time lapses. It's just set up like single bracket settings, and then your interval shoot function is really going to be how you take a time lapse. And you can change, any setting that you want. You can change your shooting interval. So right now it's set up to where after 1 second the time lapse will start, and then every 3 seconds it will take a photo. And right now it's set up to only take 30 photos, but you can change this to whatever number you want, but you can kind of set it up however you want it to. And then you can change your shutter modes, so you can do silent shutter, you can do the mechanical shutter or the electronic, whatever you prefer. A lot of these are user preference, but one of the big ones is steady shot. And I always keep steady shot on. Shooting display, this basically just allows us to turn on our grid lines on our monitor, just so we can kind of frame our shots better. Really, it's, again, just like user preference. And then marker displays, I just usually have set to off. And honestly, the rest of the settings in this menu are very like user preference. Some of them are like creative looks, where you can kind of like make your image look a certain way in camera instead of doing some of that stuff in post-production. Obviously, it's not going to look at, like, you're not going to be able to do masking and that kind of thing, but you are going to be able to up the vibrance and contrast and things like that. But in my personal opinion, I don't do any of that stuff. I do all of that in Lightroom after the fact, so I don't really mess with that too much. Now, if you really wanted a really long breakdown of exactly what everything on this camera does, Jason Herman has a fantastic video about it, and I will put his video up here if you want to go check it out. But it's like an hour 10, and he really just does a very thorough walkthrough of the camera. But if you just want to get your camera and get out and shoot, this is the setup that I would do. But if you do have any more questions about anything, something that I maybe didn't cover or something you wanted me to cover, please just leave those down in the comments, and I am going to be answering all of those down there. Anyways, that's gonna be it from me, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.